starting with the least painful and slowly descending into the absolute nightmares of ancient torture. Frozen alive. This method was used in parts of Siberia and Eastern Europe, particularly in remote labor camps and during wartime reprisals. The victim was stripped naked or nearly naked, doused with freezing water and tied to a pole or left outside in sub-zero temperatures. In some cases, this process was repeated. Water poured over them layer by layer until the body was encased in ice. Death came slowly through hypothermia, frostbite, and organ failure. Some were left conscious for hours before succumbing. This was used against prisoners, spies, or enemies of the regime, especially when silent, untraceable death was preferred. I will rate this a 4.5 out of 10. Breaking wheel. This was used across medieval Europe, especially in France and Germany. The breaking wheel was a torture execution device designed to prolong suffering. The condemned person was tied to a large wooden wheel. The executioner would use a heavy iron bar to shatter the arms, legs, and other limbs by striking them between the wheel's spokes. In some cases, the broken limbs were woven through the spokes, and the wheel was mounted vertically, displaying the body until death. Sometimes a mercy blow to the chest or neck was given at the end, but often the victim was left to die slowly from shock and blood loss. This punishment was used for murderers, robbers, and traitors, especially those guilty of severe or public crimes. I will rate this a 6 out of 10. Brazen Bull. The Brazen Bull was an execution device used in ancient Greece, particularly in the city of Achragos in Sicily. It was designed by a craftsman named Perillos and commissioned by the tyrant Phalaris in the 6th century BCE. A hollow bronze bull was constructed with a door on the side. The condemned person was locked inside, and a fire was lit beneath the bull, heating the metal until the person inside was roasted alive. The bull was engineered with tubes and whistles inside the head so that the victim's screams would be transformed into sounds resembling a raging bull. This method was used for traitors, rebels, and those accused of serious crimes against the state. It served both as punishment and public spectacle. I will rate this a 7.5 out of 10. Impalement. Impalement was widely used across different empires, most infamously by Vlad III of Wallachia, also known as Vlad the Impaler, in the 15th century. A long, sharpened wooden or metal stake was inserted through the victim's body, often through the rectum or vagina, and pushed until it exited the upper body, sometimes through the mouth or shoulder. The stake was then planted vertically in the ground, and the person was left to die slowly, sometimes over the course of hours or even days, as gravity pulled them down the stake. This punishment was used for criminals, prisoners of war, and political enemies. Vlad used it primarily to terrify invading forces and to establish brutal control over his territory. I will rate this a 7 out of 10. Rat torture. Rat torture was a brutal method, used primarily in medieval Europe and later during some early colonial periods. The process involved placing a metal or clay container filled with live rats onto the victim's bare stomach or chest. The top of the container was then heated using fire or burning coal. As the heat increased, the rats became desperate to escape and began digging downward, gnawing into the person's body. They would burrow through the skin, muscle, and even into internal organs, causing intense physical agony and a slow, gruesome death. This punishment was typically used during interrogations or executions for criminals, traitors, or enemies of the state, especially when authorities wanted to extract information or instill fear. I will rate this a 8 out of 10. Execution by elephant. This method was used in South and Southeast Asia, particularly in India and Sri Lanka, for over 2,000 years. Royal elephants were trained to execute prisoners under command. The condemned would be brought before the crowd and the elephant would be ordered to trample them. In some cases, elephants were trained to delay the kill, crushing limbs first, dragging the victim, or even tossing them before delivering a fatal stomp. It served both as punishment and public demonstration of royal power. It was used against traitors, rebels, and thieves, especially when rulers wanted to make an example out of someone. I will rate this a 6 out of 10. Blood Eagle. The blood eagle was a legendary execution method associated with the Vikings, particularly in Norse sagas from the 9th and 10th centuries. While some historians debate whether it was ever truly practiced, the detailed accounts make it one of the most horrifying punishments ever described. The victim's back was cut open, and the ribs were severed from the spine one by one. Then, the ribs were pulled outward to resemble wings. After that, the executioner would pull out the lungs and drape them over the shoulders, completing the eagle appearance. Salt was sometimes rubbed into the wounds to prolong pain. The victim was ideally kept alive through most of the process. This method was reportedly reserved for enemies of the Norse, particularly those who killed a Viking king or high-ranking noble. It was not just a punishment, but a brutal form of honor-based vengeance. I will rate this a 9 out of 10. Scaphism. Scaphism was used by the ancient Persians and is considered one of the slowest and most degrading forms of execution ever recorded. The victim was stripped naked and placed between two boats or hollowed-out logs, leaving only the head, hands, and feet exposed. They were force-fed milk and honey, causing severe diarrhea, and their body was smeared with the same mixture. This attracted insects, which began feeding on the flesh, laying eggs, and burrowing into the body. The person would remain alive for days, suffering from exposure, infection, and being literally eaten alive by bugs. This punishment was used for those who committed treason or grave offenses against the empire. I will give it a 10 out of 10. That's it for today. Feel free to give a feedback about this video in the comment box, and for this type of video, stay tuned to my channel.